Hi guys, welcome back to Chess the Matthew. So on this video, we will tackle about the Caro-Kann defense on the Apocalypse attack. So the set opening start with the moves of e4, and here the black plays c6, the Caro-Kann defense, in which by playing c6, it actually supports any d5 push. For example, after here the white plays knight f3, and here comes now the d5. So here, we will go to the Apocalypse attack. For example, after e takes d5, c takes d5, and knight to e5. Although we violate some opening principles by moving twice our pieces in the opening, but still it is okay in this position because it actually controls a lot of squares in the board, and the knight on e5 seems so dominant on the e5 square. So here we already tackle some lines, for example, in which the black plays bishop to f5, which is actually a bad move. Instead, here after knight to e5, we will go to the another fourth move of black, in which to play knight c6, challenging now this knight on e5 and hoping that here will capture now the knight, for example, and again having a huge center majority of pawns on the board. So here after knight to c6, here we will simply play as white to play the move d4, trying to maintain our knight on e5, be supported with our deeper pawn. And if the black here will capture that knight, and we have a simple recapture of d takes to e5, in which it actually prevents any development of the knight on g8, and again any for example queen to d6 idea of black. For example, after queen to d6, bishop to f5, and maybe at some point castle on the queen side. But here, if the black will naturally plays f5, again developing his Caro-Kann bishop outside, for example from the chain. After in the future he will play e6, but we will simply play queen to f3, trying to attack that undefended bishop on the f5 square. So here, if the black can defend his bishop, his pawn, and again trying to accomplish his mission, for example by putting his bishop on f5 out of this pawn chain, and again attacking this undefended pawn on c2. But after e6, the white here immediately wins in just 10 moves, for example after bishop to b5 check. So the king here must be moved out of the check, or maybe he can cover, but still after bishop takes d7, it is pretty obvious that the white here will be actually winning with a huge material advantage. So if the king will be moved to e7, but the game is over after queen to a3 check, so the king cannot escape the checks. For example, he cannot capture these checking pieces, but the only thing he can do is to cover with his queen, but still it is checkmate after queen takes d6 checkmate. So in just 10 moves, the white here wins through checkmate. So here we go after e4, c6, knight f3, d5, a takes, c takes, knight e5, the Apocalypse attack of white here, and after knight c6, d4, and knight takes e5, d takes e5, bishop e5 is actually a bad move, for example, because here the white can actually go, for example, an immediate win, for example after playing bishop b5 check, and after bishop d7, queen takes d5, a6, takes, and after king takes, and bishop to e3. We shall see in this position now that the white here is actually winning with an extra pawn in the end game. So for example after bishop f5, although we can play our content move, for example after queen f3, attacking that bishop, hoping for example he will play e6, for example, and going into the checks and a checkmate on the d6 square. But after d takes to e5, the black here should not play bishop to f5, but instead play a solid move, for example after e6, trying to open up some lines for his queen and bishop on the board. And for example after bishop to d3, intending to castle now on the king side, but there is simple knight e7, trying to reroute his knight on g6, for example, and trying to attack that pawn on e5. And let's say for example queen to e2 first before castling, anticipating that the black here will play knight g6 and attack the independent pawn on e4, bishop to d7, trying to develop his bishop, again controlling this diagonal, covering any possible checks, for example because of the battery of the queen and bishop. King side castling, knight g6, f4, again solidifying the e5 pawn, and again trying to complete the development of black by giving a tempo with a check, for example development and a check to the white's king. King h1, king side castling, knight d2, queen c7, knight f3, trying to control the center, and after an aggressive attempt to open now the f file with f6, but there is simple bishop to d2, and again the evaluation on this position is actually equal. So after e4 c6 and again going into the apocalypse attack, knight c6 is actually the best move here instead of playing bishop to f5, because after knight c6, although there is d4 for white, but still the black can easily neutralize the aggressive attack of the white, for example after takes and pawn takes. But instead of playing bishop to f5, which is actually a bad move, the black here should play here e6 to avoid, for example, the checkmate after bishop to f5, queen f3, e6 check, and again check and takes with a check and mate. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to subscribe.